Good. Oh.
Hi there.
Okay, here we go.
He's got a bigger one.
I just want to say on behalf of the PI Woodlot Owners Association and with funding support from the Forested Landscape Priority Place Program for Species at Risk, we would like to welcome everyone to our first Women in Forestry seminar. I'm really pleased to have you all today. It's such a great crowd. Very happy that you all came. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that the land upon which we gather is unceded Mi'kmaq territory. Apatic, or Prince Edward Island, is part of the Mi'kmaq and is covered by the historic treaties of peace and friendship. We pay respects to the indigenous Mi'kmaq people who have occupied this island for over 12,000 years, past, present, and future. I would just like to welcome Kathy Stewart. She's going to be our MC for the day. She was former president of PI Woodlot Owners Association, and we really appreciate you being here today.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to see so many here today, both men and women, and it's so nice not to have the limitations we used to have years ago when I was growing up in becoming involved with forestry or anything to do with woodlots, although women have always been multitaskers and we're always busy on something, so it's nice that we have this ability to get excited about the occupation of forest that's involved with forestry without regard to gender, and hopefully you can see from the attendance today that half the population deserves a chance to become involved in dealing with our woodlots and forestry in general. And I won't take up much time this morning. We have a wonderful group of presenters this morning, and first one that I'm introducing is Helena Perry. Helena is an independent consultant, a chartered herbalist. She has over 15 years of experience connecting people to the land through plant knowledge and traditional teachings. She is the founder of Seven Fire Sanctuary, which focuses on strengthening relationships with the land, preserving indigenous traditions, and supporting healthier, more sustainable communities. It's wonderful to focus on sustainability as well, because that wasn't a word that was even invented, I don't think, when I was growing up. So but we've come a long way. We've got a long way to go yet, but it's exciting to see all the young people in the room. Through plant identification, sustainable harvesting, and storytelling, Helena shares knowledge about the cultural, historical, and ecological relationships between indigenous peoples. So we will welcome Helena and
Hoi, Linda Lucy Helena Perry. Hi, my name is Helena Perry. I am a knowledge keeper. I am a chartered herbalist, and my ancestors came from this area on my mother's side of the family, the Mi'kmaq. So when we were acknowledging the territory, which is wonderful, thank you very much. I had just been, ADHD Googling way too much one day, and I was looking at some historical maps and stuff like that. And Tracadie is one of the busiest areas for the Mi'kmaq in terms of portage routes before the Europeans came. So it was a major route from the Hillsborough River to the ocean, or Winter Bay, not just Winter Bay, but Tracadie Bay on this side. And when you look at the old maps, you'll notice most of the Mi'kmaq place names most often refer to that part of land, but in a way that's connected to the water, because PEI or Ebdeg would have been like a summer location. The Mi'kmaq people were, we traveled, depending on what time of the year it was, either following, food sources. Here it was like during summertime, it was a lot of shellfish and things like that. But yeah, we would have dedicated traditional, I don't know how many thousands of years those paths were used, but right here in this place was one of the most used portage trails. So from Hillsborough to Tracadie Bay. I grew up in this area. I was born in Mill Cove. My grandmother, we all lived in one little spot. And it was through my mother's, my grandmother's, and so on, so my matrilineal side of the family where my Mi'kmaq side comes from. And I remember a lot of things about my childhood, and I guess I'm old enough now to go, I remember when, but I remember when my grandmother did not have the freedom to express her culture. The only time I knew of her speaking in Mi'kmaq was on her deathbed, because when a person is getting closer to that transition, oftentimes they revert to their birth language, and that's what happened to my grandmother. But at the time, way back when, it was not a good or positive thing to be acknowledged as Indigenous. I can think of terms that I've heard as a child, that gives me a good perspective because I've seen so much change. Like going from what my grandmother experienced and not being allowed to talk to her children in Mi'kmaq to nowadays where there are a lot of people and organizations who are interested in the Indigenous knowledge, what we have in tradition with regards to science and so many other things. So yes, I do want to acknowledge this place. Tracadie was, on the French maps, it was called Tracadie. And before that, in Mi'kmaq, it was Telegatic. So if you pass by every day, on your way to work, you see the sign heading to Scotchford, and it says Teloctic. So Teloctic is, a more modern version of Telecatic, which would have meant, I'm trying to remember, it means gathering place. So Telegotic means gathering place. So like again, it's referring to the fact that the Mi'kmaq came through here, spent a lot of time here. And I just want to save space for my grandmother and let her know that, you know, that knowledge did get passed on to me. It got passed on to my aunts, and I see in action these days, I see it getting passed on to my niece. Or, sorry, she's like a niece, but she's actually a cousin, so. Anyway, it's good to see that matrilineal knowledge getting passed on. And I hear a lot of times lately that maybe we should be trying to be a little bit more matrilineal based society just because of the craziness in the world. And I kind of tend to agree, but that's my personal. So, what I do as a knowledge keeper is I share my knowledge about the medicinal plants here in PEI. Way back when, we wouldn't have had family doctors or specialists. We would have gone to a healer that lived nearby our community. And that healer likely would have known everybody in that community and all the specific details about that person. So whether they were allergic to goldenrod, or you know they had seasonal allergies, or they definitely couldn't eat shellfish, whatever the case may be, the healer knew each person's individual constitutions. It's a little bit different than what we experience today, where, for example, like if I went in and wanted to get tested for diabetes, and somebody else I knew also wanted to go in and get tested for diabetes, we would both likely come away with a similar or the same medication, because it's about the symptoms. You don't match the person, you match the symptoms. So that's a little bit where indigenous medicine kind of shifts, where it's a little bit different. Now, when I'm kind of talking about this, I'm sort of alluding to has anybody, show of hands, heard of I'm trying to think of the right word, heard of the concept, thank you brain, of two-eyed seeing? Yeah, okay, so a good number of us, that's awesome. So two-eyed seeing, briefly, is a concept that was kind of brought back to life by Albert Marshall, Dr. Albert Marshall in Cape Breton, who's a Mi'kmaq. And basically it means that to get the best results out of whatever, it could be forestry, it could be mental health, it could be gardening. If you look at what you're doing with two-eyed seeing, what that means is you're looking with one eye or one perspective on the scientific or European kind of worldview or perspective. So very scientific, typically science-based, and apply that to a situation, that's great. But with two-eyed seeing, you're also applying the indigenous lens, and that kind of adds that traditional knowledge, that different way of looking at the world. And oftentimes when you combine the two, it's that perspective that shifts a little. You may have kind of like the set idea about how forests work well, right? But if you're talking to a knowledge keeper in any of our communities, you may have a few things kind of that you experience with them that sort of opens your eyes to what's in the forest and how the forest works. Now, a lot of us probably here, especially those of us working in any of the conservation or forestry kind of streams, that's been more and more kind of used in the last 5-10 years, which is lovely. And I just want to see more of that, so yay. But by doing that, you give the best of yourself to the problem that you're facing or situation that you're facing. So if we all walked into the woods today or tomorrow, right? If we went for a walk up by Glenladale, for example, a forester goes in and they may see like stand age, canopy, whether it's what's it called? Where they're like farm trees. Plantation. Oops. Plantation. So they're gonna see things that they're familiar with that they use in their everyday work. A botanist may enter that same forest and see the soil. What kind of soil is there, what's building, how long that forest was there intact, and the understory, all the plants that live under and around the trees. Now, and I can speak from my own experience, a medicinal plant knowledge keeper goes in there and we see everything. That's why if you ever go on a walk with me, my head's like this, and it's a wonder I don't walk into trees more often, honestly. So when we go in there, to us, it's a communication, it's a connection, and everything is part of that. So let's say, you know, if I was going in as a healer and someone had approached me in that aspect, asked me for a remedy for something, I would go into the woods with that in mind. I would think of them, I would think about what they asked and what they need, and I would just kind of put it out there into the atmosphere. You know, I put it out in my intentions, like ask the plants and trees and everything to kind of guide me to find the right medicine for this person. So if I had two people in my office, maybe they were even in the same family that had the same symptoms, right? I'm gonna go out there into the woods and I will likely find a very specific medicine for each person based on those, I'm gonna call them vibes. And I know it sounds woo-woo, but when you've had it happen and it turns out that it makes so much sense, it's just beyond. And we can talk about this later, but I can tell you a little bit about the 4 sacred medicines that are important to most Indigenous groups, First Nations, like there's sage, cedar, sweetgrass, and tobacco. I could spend all day talking about them. I'm not going to today, but so we classify them as the 4 sacred herbs because they are known to have multiple important uses. So not only am I using sage to smudge, to get rid of bad energy and to kind of get rid of illness, I can also use sage as a tea. I can use sage in a sweat lodge. Like there are just so many ways to use these medicines. So when we say that they're sacred, typically it means that plant has a connection to more than just one healing or spiritual aspect. When I go into the woods, it's a little bit different because all the plants are sacred to me as a healer. So I could go in there and I could find dandelion, which everybody is like, dandelion, gotta get the dandelion out of my yard. Love dandelion. Like, it's such an amazing healer for, like, you know, you have kidney problems, get some dandelion root. So it doesn't matter necessarily where on the hierarchical scale those plants are. It could be a tree, it could be an invasive plant, it could be the mycelium, it could be the creatures living there that kind of give me some wisdom to take back for healing. So it's all sacred. And the more connected I am to that forest, the better the communication is. So when I was born in Mill Cove, I remember that I was fascinated with the natural spring. I have a stream or a creek in the back of my property, and my parents were terrified I was going to like topple in there and drown because I was down there all the time. I was always touching the water. And then my dad took me one day, and I don't know if he dunked me or if I fell in and he let me, but it was like polar cold. So I didn't do that again. But he built me a bridge, and that was like one of my favorite memories, was he built me this little red bridge so that I could look at the creek whenever I wanted safely. But I remember just laying there on the ground and watching like the fronds. I don't actually know what species they were, but it was kind of like a mossy grass just kind of going with the current. I could sit there all day and watch that. I still, as an adult, am fascinated with bubbling springs and natural springs. Man, I got lost there for a second. So, I'm gonna bring it back to Albert Marshall. So, the concept of two-eyed seeing is pretty well known, but I just want to play a little clip of that. So, Etowakdamuk is how you pronounce two-eyed seeing in Mi'kmaq. Etowakdamuk, two-eyed seeing, is a guiding principle developed by Mi'kmaq elder Albert Marshall that recognizes that better outcomes are more likely if we bring two or more perspectives into collaboration. Accordingly, Etowakdamuk can also be understood as a gift of multiple perspectives, an insight and framework that could help us do better in many areas of our shared lives, including our relationship with the earth. And like this kind of get together is wonderful because we all kind of can talk to each other and talk about our perspectives, and all of that information is really, really important. And the changes come when we come together like this and talk about the woods, the environment, the thing that we're passionate about. This isn't audio. I hope that.
You developed a course called Integrative Science Program, in which you did exactly that by weaving our traditional knowledge with Western science. And as that process was ongoing, we could see what Western science is and what Western science can do. And the thing that's overarching was Western science cannot see our natural world as a subject, but rather as an object. And through this integrated science program, that was instilled in not just the Aboriginal people, but other people as well, that we should be able to create entities that will not be as harmful as before. We should have to be very mindful that this project cannot and should not compromise ecological integrity. Realizing, of course, we need economic opportunities. But with the human mind, we are capable of suggesting and creating alternatives that would be much more healthy and holistic.
You've touched upon two things that are sometimes seen in opposition. So,
We like to read it.
That's a really, really interesting talk. And if anybody wants that link, I can send it to them. Just chat with them later. So, when I'm talking about two-eyed seeing as well, when it comes to things like, I don't know if it was the Woodlot Association or if it was the Sustainable Forests that was having like a similar get-together at one point. I remember there were there were a couple of foresting companies there, and like we each kind of did a quick talk, like Abequate Conservation Society kind of did a little talk, and then I think I did a little talk, and some others, and then the forestry groups came up and presented, and there was definitely a shift in like I'm talking about like the spirit of the woods and communication and two-eyed seeing, and they're coming up and they're talking about like materials, lifestyles, and absolutely there's nothing wrong with any of that. We should all be able to sustain ourselves. I was pleasantly surprised that day that my idea of how those companies worked was shifted quite a bit from my preconceived notion of them. And I think kind of stepping out of your familiar box is really good too. Like I've taken courses, this is kind of random, I've taken courses with the province for trapping and firearm and all that kind of stuff. Some things are not popular with the general public, but taking courses like that allowed me to get rid of those preconceived notions, to understand a little bit of how the system works for these different modalities, and it made me appreciate them a lot more, but they're needed very much. But here's where one of my terms comes into play. When I go on walks with people and I'm educating them about the plants, I have a couple of things that I always find myself saying. One of them is everything in moderation. We could do what we needed to do without affecting the environment the way it's being affected. So it's like medicine. If you take too much, let me pick one. So if I was to pick a bayberry plant root and give it to someone because they were having problems with digestion, it's perfectly okay, as long as they're not allergic, to give them that as a short-term medicine. But if they were to take large amounts of bayberry over a long period of time, they're probably going to develop some kind of problem, right? And that's pretty typical for anything. Like if I drank too much Tang orange juice, I would probably get sick. So that's kind of something you have to consider, not just about medicinal plant keeping, but about dieting, medication, capitalism, all of that kind of stuff, right? Everything in moderation, because once you have too much of something, it does tend to turn into something negative. So that's just something I wanted to share. We can have trappers, we can have foresters, we can have medicine people, we can have furniture carvers, we can have everybody, but we have to maintain the forests. We have to become in relationship to them so that if we take, we give back. And we do it in a way that we're aware of what that forest looks like so that we can return it back to its state. All right, so how am I doing for time?
10 minutes.
Okay.
Or more.
Okay, we're good. All right, so as a plant medicine keeper, I chose 3 plants that grow here in PEI that are an indicator of the forest's health. So these medicinal plants often act as ecological indicators. One of them is the sweet fern we see here. It is a nitrogen fixer. It appears in disturbed soils, and for medicine, it's used for aiding digestion, and reducing fever. So when I go, if I need to harvest sweet fern, I would go out there and I would look at what's available. If it's just a small clump, I'm not going to touch it because it's kind of struggling. If I see like a road and it's got sweet fern all the way down the road, bonus. However, I have to keep in mind the pollution's off the road and so on. So one of the protocols for harvesting for Mi'kmaq people is never take the first plant. So I guess that would mean like not, when everything is kind of coming out in the spring, you don't harvest the first plant that you, like I wouldn't harvest the first sweet fern that came up, for example. I also wouldn't harvest the last for obvious reasons. And I've heard other protocols just basically saying, you know, if you're looking at a field of whatever, like medicinal herb, then you pick conservatively from each plant so that you're not stressing the plant out, that plant can recover. There's so many things to take into consideration when you're doing this. So I'm not going to go out there and I'm not going to harvest all of the chicken in the woods mushrooms, you know, after a rain. I'm not going to scoop them all up. I'm going to leave some of them there so that they can come back and somebody else can use them. But like, plants like this are not often considered, you know, in terms of the old forestry way of like just clear cutting. Like the understory really suffers with that kind of work. Like so, and I'm only speaking from my knowledge of this from a course I took from way back. But selective cuts and things like that are much more kind to the forest, and so I'm gonna stop talking about something I don't know a whole lot. So this is another, now this is a plant that I hear my elders talking about quite a bit because they, you know, they used to have their spots that they would go to for medicine. Now it's either no longer there, or they don't have access to the land, or they haven't seen it in a while. This plant grows, I've seen it in quite a few places in PEI. This is gold thread, and when I'm walking and doing a medicine walk, I'm doing that weird scanning thing that I do, and I often get excited because I see a lot of like wild strawberry plants, and the leaves are very similar. So, you know, every once in a while I'll dig in there, I'll get under there and check the roots, because the roots are indeed very golden. And they're important medicinally, because if you take a small piece of that root, is there anybody here who's been forced by me on a walk to take a little piece of gold thread? Julie Lynn. It's extremely bitter. It's a very bitter root. Like most of the kids, if I'm doing wild child or something like that, they'll be like, bah, bah, bah. But it stimulates saliva in the mouth. If you take something bitter, that happens. And the first part of your digestive system is your salivary, is producing saliva. So that saliva triggers kind of like a wake-up call to what's going on in your stomach and your intestines, and it gets ready for digestion. That's why in the old days they used to have something before meals or after meals called, must have been after meals, called aperitifs, to kind of help along digestion, because they would eat a great big huge meal. So I only need a little piece of that root to take back to somebody who might have dry mouth or might have ulcers in the mouth, and this is going to definitely be astringent and bitter and kind of like not just dry the mouth in a bad way, but it's also going to kind of be antibacterial, so it's going to take some bad germs out, but it's going to stimulate the salivary glands, and that is all good for the digestive system. So this is something that my elders talk about a lot, and it's an indicator of a forest that has not been disturbed, because to grow there, it has to have a canopy. It has to have cool, stable forest floors. So if I was up west and I was in one of the old growth type forests, I'd be surprised if I couldn't find myself some bull thread. But again, when it comes to harvesting, I would only need a little bit. So it should always be there for when I need it. But if somebody comes along and does a clear cut, it's gone. It might be gone forever. It might take a long time to come back, but it'll be gone. So, okay, not bad. And Labrador tea. So this is another kind of bioindicator. It likes wet, acidic soils, so it's perfect for this area. A lot of you who spend a good amount of time outdoors have probably seen Labrador tea. I don't know why. Kate, I used your pick. It's not showing. There's a picture of there's a picture of Kate holding the underside of that Labrador tea leaf, and it's orange, kind of like a fuzzy orange underneath. I'll go back for a second. So, if you're walking in the woods and you smell this lovely sweet smell, it's quite possible you've walked through a patch of the Labrador tea, which is a very popular tea beverage for Indigenous people. And again, it's good for helping to dry up like if you've got a wet cough, it'll help dry up that phlegm. Associated with peatlands and bog edges. Obviously, we know that's a very sensitive environment, and it's a very important carbon sink. So, and then to all the women in forestry, thank you. I've worked with you guys for 3 years now through the FLPP program, kind of as a liaison with MCPEI, and I just want to say it's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you, Walalan, and I'll be around the rest of the day for questions.